Now here we got a circumstance that, let's say we were to build a netting needle like this. You can see that you've got to have a piece of wood that is relatively knot free and the grain is relatively smooth. Now sometimes we talk about grain. There has been times in the past, well, I provide the students with a piece of wood that looks something like this. Maybe this isn't so steep. And the knot, so that I can very quickly discuss the issue of grain. So in the grain there is the general tendency of the fibers of the wood to have some influence on the way your knife acts. So for example, if I take this corner, I get a very smooth action by going, it's like petting a cat. You pet a cat from its nose to its tail. It doesn't like to be petted from its tail to its nose. So the student tries to do this, they discover very quickly that it just does not work. Your knife wants to draw into the thing and you can't make any slices. And I like to include a knot so that people recognize the influence that knots have over the grain. So you find that one way the cuts are impossible or horrible, the other way the cuts are smooth and readily done. So when you have this cut across the grain net, it's very easy to demonstrate. On this side, you have to look at the grain more closely because generally one way it'll be smooth and in a subtle direction the other way won't be that smooth. It'll be uncontrolled as far as the cut is concerned. So that's one way to teach the scouts and the Girl Guides and so on about the issue of grain in wood. Now when you get a piece of knot-free wood, it's kind of unusual in the area of lumber in generally pine more predictably, but generally spruce and things like that might provide nice straight grain wood, you have to work between the knotty parts, cut out the knot-free parts. And the important thing that we want to bring across here is how the knife is sharpened. The knife has to be sharpened in a special way for you to be able to make that cut. It's obvious that if I make the cut like that and do a lot of them, that's used in fire lighting. So generally, to sharpen a knife, you have two methods of ways of treating your edge. One that will predictably produce beautiful shavings in the area of working with wood with the grain, and the other where you don't need to do that. So a knife that's used for cutting meat isn't necessarily, you don't want to go to the bother because it takes 10 times more effort to make the edge of your knife to allow you to do this. You'll notice that I'm smoothing this board, how I might not really be able to go across the whole width of the board, but if I take a slight angle that way and a slight angle that way and then take the hump off in between, then I'll get a fairly level piece. And of course the feather stick making, which is another skill, it knows how you might choose to keep the feathers in a configuration. So generally the standard feather stick wood would be elbow to fingertip or thereabouts and thumb by thumb in dimension, and then you take the feathers off to the extent that they act as kindling. Kindling is determined by the test of holding a match flame to it and saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if the materials are not burning, they're not kindling. Kindling has to be defined very strictly for you to know what you're working with. Well, that will catch on a flash, whereas something that's like so, that might not catch. So that's not really kindling. But that is, but that isn't. Now the issue of carving and knitting needle, the shaving of wood, not all wood shaves, and you've got to know how to handle it. So here, for example, is a piece of the wood, that the willow that's cured properly, where we know through experience that that's exquisitely shaveable. And when you take off these type of curls, the slice that you have left here is extremely smooth, requiring no sanding. So if this was a canoe paddle handle and my knife is sharpened enough and my skill is great enough, you'll find that my work will be very, very fine and won't require sanding, as a canoe paddle handle that isn't smooth is going to wear you raw. So there's essentially three things operating here. One is the knife, and you've got to know all about the knife and how it's sharpened and how it's configured. Number two, the materials. You can't do this with junk. You can only do this with certain small percentage of the wood that you find in the forest. And then comes your skill, because I can give this knife to an unskilled person and it'll be quite some time before they're making these curls. That's the issue of that. So it is important to know how to sharpen your knife so that you can achieve this type of curling, because that's one of the things that you expect of your knife almost more than any other ability, is to make these fine shavings.